How's it going, everybody? Thank you very much for watching. I'm Orlando Ruiz Jr. Welcome to another classic movie review. This is my review of a film that came out in 1946, directed by Frank Capra, that stars Jimmy Stewart and Donna Reed. It's a Wonderful Life. This is a movie that is considered by many to be one of the greatest movies ever made, myself included. This is a movie that I watch every year around Christmas and never fails to get an emotional response from me. Every time I watch it, the waterworks just come out. I'm not ashamed to say. It is a very moving film. It is a Christmas movie that has a fantasy sort of element to it, has pretty dark themes, has themes of suicide and, themes of depression, but also has a great message, very uplifting message. And it's a movie that I love to watch time and time again, and I can't wait for other people to check this out for the first time, because once you see it, it's one of those movies you can't unsee. It has such a great story, and George Bailey, the character of George Bailey, played by Jimmy Stewart, to me is one of the greatest movie characters of all time, up there with Rocky Balboa and Dr. Frankenstein and like Luke Skywalker and Vito Corleone, and he's just a great character, selfless character, person that kind of instills a bit of hope and humanity. And the movie begins with the image of a sky and stars, blinking stars, as we hear the voiceover of God speaking to an angel named Clarence, and they're discussing the life of George Bailey, who is considering, uh, well, taking his life. And so then the movie goes into flashback mode, where we see George Bailey as a young boy, and we see the very first selfless act by a young George Bailey, which is saving the life of his younger brother as they are playing in some ice, doing a little sledding, and his brother falls in some thin ice. George jumps in and saves him, and he has an accident involving his ear. He goes deaf in one ear because of going into the cold water. And after this, we see another very selfless act, as George is working at a drugstore at a soda fountain counter, involving his boss. His boss has just gotten word of his son's death through a telegram, and George realizes that his boss is really going through it and isn't realizing what he's doing behind the counter, and sees that he's accidentally putting some kind of poison into these capsules that are a prescription for someone. And he points it out to him, and it's a very emotional moment, because the man gets upset at first and starts smacking George around, until he realizes the mistake that he's made. And George points it out to him, and of course, feels sorry and starts apologizing to George. It's a very moving moment in the film. And at this same scene involving this at the soda fountain, there's an introduction of a couple of characters as young girls, Violet and Mary. The two of them become prominent characters in the movie and important in George's life, one a lot more so than the other. And there's a very cute moment where young Mary whispers something into George's ear and gets close to him, and she has a crush on him, and it's just very sweet, because she knows that he can't hear anything out of that ear. And of course, later on, she comes back into the film when George is at sort of a college age, goes to this dance, and they're reunited. And right away, there are sparks and chemistry between the two of them, and sort of takes her. She's with somebody else, and sort of just takes her and starts dancing. And the guy that she was with gets kind of peeved. He's like, "Hey," and wants to get a little revenge on George. So presses a button where it makes the floor open up, and there's a pool underneath, and people are watching as George and Mary are dancing up a storm, getting closer and closer to the edge of the pool. It's a very funny moment. Of course, they fall in the pool eventually, and it becomes a pool party. And they're having a walk home. I think she's wearing a robe because she's has her clothes all wet, and so they're walking home, and gets her robe caught in some bushes, and she's naked hiding behind the bushes. And it's a very playful little moment between the two of them. During the scene where George is having this playful moment with Mary, sort of teasing her about giving her her robe back, A passerby tells George that something has happened to his father, and George's father suddenly dies, and George ends up committing another selfless act by taking over his father's business for him and letting his younger brother Harry use his college scholarship instead. And so the agreement is for Harry to go to college, finish up, and then come back and help run the building and loan so that George can get on with his life and do what he wanted to do, which is he wants to build towns and cities and bridges, because he was going to go off to college originally. And of course, everything ends up sort of up in the air after his father ends up passing. And so George ends up thinking about those around him, the people in his life, the townspeople that his father has been helping all his life, because all of them would have ended up living in slums, being overpriced by someone named Potter, who is in the town, who pretty much has a monopoly on most of the businesses in the town and wants the building and loan as well, only to see it go under. So George and Mary are now married, but they're unable to go on their honeymoon because they gave a lot of their money away to many of the people in the town to help keep the building and loan going. And so George goes home, and it turns out to be this house that they were walking by years ago when she had her robe caught in the bushes. And this house is really decrepit, and she's doing her best to make it seem like a home. And she has all kinds of like vacation posters everywhere, and there's like meat rotating in the fire, and there's a record playing, like vacation music, and even people in the town, like the policeman and like the cab driver and stuff, they all do what they can to help out George. And it starts to become apparent to the viewer that George really does have this connection with the townspeople, and that the townspeople really do care for this guy because all of the good he does. And so throughout the movie, we see the effect that he has on the people around him. So now we get to the third act, and it's the holiday season, it's the Christmas season, and George's uncle Billy, who works at the building and loan, is supposed to take some money, about $8,000, to the bank. And when he's at the bank, he actually loses this money. And somebody that works for Potter, who is the competition, ends up finding this money and gives it to Potter. And now Potter knows of the trouble that George is in. And when George realizes what has happened, he pretty much loses all hope. He gets to a really low point, and he's pretty much facing some serious jail time for fraud. And so he starts to become really desperate, and he ends up at a bridge looking down at the cold water as it's snowing, and starts to think about taking that last plunge. And this is when the angel decides to intercede, and he shows up. Clarence shows up, jumps into the water, and George ends up jumping in after Clarence and pulls him out. Later on, they're in this little shack getting warm, trying to dry off, and Clarence tells him, you know, you would have jumped in and died if it wasn't for me. I saved your life. And starts telling him how he's an angel. And of course, he's going to be skeptical about that. George isn't really believing in angels at the moment, so he needs some, he needs a little persuasion. And Clarence decides to show George what his life would be like had he not been born. So Clarence takes George on this tour of Bedford Falls in this alternate reality in which George was never born. And in this alternate reality, George finds that his brother never lived through that incident in the ice because he wasn't there to save him. And not just that, but the woman that he ends up marrying turns out to become an old maid. Many of the people that George helped throughout his life because of the building and loan and just keeping that business afloat, many of them end up having a different outcome. And so slowly George starts to see the effect that he has had on many of the people in his town. And it all starts to culminate in this great realization and breakthrough that feels completely genuine and real because of the performance by Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart is really the secret sauce of this movie, because even though the script is perfect, the dialogue is very engaging and entertaining, it's Jimmy Stewart's performance that holds it all together. He really is the glue because he's a marvel to watch. You really do feel that every line out of his mouth is just spontaneous and real. It feels genuine, and at the big realization, the big breakthrough at the final moments of the film, you really feel like this guy has a turnaround, and it's always amazing to watch. No matter how many times I rewatch this movie, it always gets me every time. It's an emotional gut punch because all of us has had bad times and times of just feeling low, feeling down, thinking that maybe we're not as good as we really are. And when George gets to that point, it really does feel heartbreaking because as you watch this movie, you see time and time again one selfless act after another, and you know that he is a good person. And all of us know people like this in real life, because in real life, there are people out there that do many people good and help others around them. And it's people like that that we need more of in this world, and we need a lot more people like George Bailey. To this day, I think this movie holds up really well. Yes, this is a movie that came out in 1946. Yes, this is a black and white movie, but it's a movie that's very well made. It's very well written, very well directed. It's acted to perfection. It has great themes, very dark themes, but has a very uplifting message. And this is just a masterpiece of cinema. And it's not just a good Christmas movie, it's a great film. So if anybody is at all remotely interested in something like that, you must check this out. This is a must watch of cinema, period. James Stewart in this movie should be enough reason for you guys to want to check this out, because if you've ever seen him in anything, whether it's a great Hitchcock movie like Rope or Rear Window, or whether it's The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, Jim Stewart has had such a great filmography in his time, and he has one great film after another, back from like the 30s into the 40s and all the way down to the 50s and into the 60s. He's had one of those great careers that's just legendary. But this movie, this might be his greatest performance ever. And that's a really high bar. And James Stewart, to me, is one of the greatest actors that ever walked this planet. And I think this movie is a prime example of his skill at its peak. And if anybody wants to see real acting, like great acting, It's a Wonderful Life, James Stewart as George Bailey, that's it right there. But as a movie itself, overall, it is a cinema masterpiece. It is a 4-star classic and a movie that everybody needs to see. That is my Blu-ray, and that is George Bailey and his wife Mary, played by Donna Reed. And this is a movie that everybody should own, I think. And if not, at least watch it just once, just to see it, especially around the holidays, because nothing like watching this around the holidays. It always gives me the feels, and it's one of those go-to movies I watch this time of year. Thank you very much to everybody who watched this classic movie review. And for those of you that are into classic movies, please keep watching. I will be coming out with at least one more review of a classic film for the end of the new year. So please keep an eye out for that. If you're new to the channel, please hit that bell, subscribe, and please be sure to share if you feel like sharing with other movie fans and fanatics that are into this kind of thing. Please go ahead and comment if you want to comment on any favorite classic Christmas films, or your favorite Jimmy Stewart film or Jimmy Stewart performance. And go ahead and leave a like if you like, and if not, that's fine. And please have a safe and happy new year. Take care of each other and be well. Peace out.